Hi again. This is Lily with the Tripod YouTube channel. We are back with another book review of yet again another fantastic book. No surprise. This is How Books Can Save Democracy by Michael Fischer, who is another TU Press author. I promise this channel doesn't just do TU Press books. I just happen to interview a lot of TU Press authors on the Tripod podcast. So it just is a natural connection that when I read their books in preparation for the interview, or if I read them after the fact, if they're doing an interview in conjunction with another author or another person, then I sometimes read it afterwards. But this book, given its very condensed size, I read before the interview, and I am very glad I did because truly pick this book up. If you're somebody who is already a reader, this is a great book to make you feel really empowered about enjoying literature and reading and stories and the value of stories. It will make you feel really optimistic and encouraged. And if you're not a reader, this is such a short book. It's 67 pages, and that's the last few are just the further reading, the list of reading that he does. So super easy read, so condensed. You can carry it anywhere, throw it in a bag, you can put it in your pocket. So if you're not a reader, great first start, and it will teach you the present day value of being a reader and somebody who enjoys literature. Because this book, How Books Can Save Democracy, is not only an explanation of the power of reading, but like a how-to guide to be a good citizen through just reading. And the general overview of the book is this is written by Michael Fischer. He is a professor of English at Trinity University. He's the Janet S. Dickey Professor in Public Humanities at Trinity University and part of the English department. And he lives in San Antonio, which is where Tripod is based out of and where I live as well. And he is fantastic. He is an author. He's written more than four books about communication and literary analysis, things like that. Excellent work, and several journals written for academics and things like that. So not necessarily something you would just sit down and read casually over a morning coffee, but something that if you're interested in political communication or English or literature, it's something you'd probably enjoy. But he's a pretty prolific author, and he recently published this. I think it just came out officially, but you can get it for pre-order if it hasn't come out yet, but it should be released. This is my pre-release copy because it's from the Trinity University Press, but pre-order it, get it now. It's great. Um, this is not an ad. And anyway, the general overview of the book is so he's taught English, he's taught humanities and all these things to Trinity University students, and he was an administrator at Trinity for 16 years. So he's really well versed in the university community and the San Antonio community, the greater English teaching community. And I was so privileged to recently have him on the podcast to talk about this book and talk about the power of literature as a source of learning on so many different fronts. And that's kind of the overview is that right now, Fisher argues that our democracy of the United States is in decline. It's kind of in peril. And I think most on any side of the political spectrum would agree with that. It's it hasn't been what a democracy is meant to be in a long time. We've had a lot of issues with it. We have so many signs that shows it's in decline, the banning of books, loss of public resources, political polarization, the othering of both sides. These are all signs and signals that a democracy is not serving its citizens as it should, and its citizens are not engaging with it in the ways that would benefit them most. That's definitely not a reach to say. And this book recognizes that and argues that our democracy isn't really succeeding for anybody right now. Nobody is happy with its current state. And when I was talking to Fisher about it, we were discussing how overwhelming that feeling is and how a lot of people feel very pessimistic about this because it feels like there's not much you can do as an individual, as one citizen, to correct the course of a democracy right now. We feel obviously voting and being part of your local government and taking initiatives within your community to get people engaged with democracy and working together as individuals are all great steps and all accessible to some degree. But it's hard to feel like you can do any steps just in your personal life to make a change. I feel like with a lot of other issues, it's like, okay, I can donate money, I can volunteer, I can spend my time doing this to help a cause, I can write things, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of endless. But with this particular situation, there is so many hurdles and obstacles to overcome to get to a place where everybody's happy. Well, I don't know if everybody will ever really be like completely happy with the situation, but we're not even at a place where we feel comfortable. And in that vein, Fisher believes, as an English teacher and a lover of reading and literature, that books do give that citizens that opportunity to make a change. Because simply by picking up a book, every time you pick up a book, right, you're engrossed in a new world. You find yourself in, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, in places, cities, families you would otherwise never be a part of. And you meet characters who sometimes they're the hero and they're easy to get along with. You understand their moral code and you support their decisions. But sometimes we get that anti-hero that challenges our beliefs and we value maybe it's their sarcasm, their humor, other aspects of their personality where we feel a kinship towards them, even though their moral compass may be skewed to a more, Robin Hood-esque type thing, where you know what they're doing isn't correct by any realistic standard. But in this world, you start to understand them from their own perspective. Maybe you get their backstory. Like, classic example of like Batman. Like what he's doing isn't legal. Like you can't go out and attack citizens. But from his background and from his story, we realize he has these powers and he has been through his childhood and his life that informs his current actions. And we don't see him as a villain. We see him as this sort of morally gray hero. And that's how so many people are in reality. So reading gives you new perspectives that you would otherwise never have, which Michael Fischer argues is a huge issue with the political polarization we're seeing now, of just being completely unable to see somebody else's perspective because we are so concerned with losing an argument or losing our higher ground on somebody that we're not even willing to get to know somebody and just see their perspective and just agree to disagree or try to work towards compromise. And in addition, books aid those conversations in another way by teaching empathy. As part of those perspectives, you're also, walking that mile in someone else's shoes, looking through somebody else's eyes, and you are able to feel what they are feeling, which can be really hard in day-to-day conversations because if somebody tells you that they believe the exact opposite of what you believe, you're immediately going to want to be defensive or try to change their mind, blah, blah, blah. But in a book, you don't get to argue back to that page. You can be sitting reading in your room and, argue to space, but that character isn't going to change based on what you're saying. And you are forced, in some degree, because the story is great and you want to keep reading, to understand their perspective, to gain that empathy, because you know where that character has come from. You know what is causing them to believe this and the way that they see a conflict versus how the hero sees it, or a side character, or a leader. There's all these different perspectives on one central story, which is so much how reality works. So literature is this separate, safe zone to explore perspectives and worlds and conflicts that doesn't make us feel like it's a life or death disagreement to have, which Michael argues is so critical to engaging in good discussions. And another huge part of the polarization and disconnect and dissonance we're all feeling is this idea that disagreement is not a value. He discusses the habits of the heart, which are these kind of unwritten rules and practices of a society where if I go out to the grocery store or the movie theater or I go to school, I'm engaging with my society and my community and practicing my empathy, practicing kindness, practicing engagement, those kinds of things, where it's not regulated. There's no rule saying I have to go spend time with these people and argue with them. it's just you run into those discussions in day-to-day life with friends, with strangers, and not necessarily political discussions, but just general disagreements at the grocery store. You're like, hey, I was in line first. No, I wasn't. Like, blah, blah, blah. Those are the habits of the heart where you're building up societal connection and communication and getting together in your environment. And we talk about that and how today we are more and more forced away from practicing those habits. A large part of it is definitely a holdover from COVID when we truly were all so far apart and becoming more and more polarized due to that because we didn't have those common everyday moments that brought us together to realize we're all very similar. We're all human. We're all working in the same environment and community and wanting it to improve. So we were talking about that and how literature and discussing it has that power to bring people together to discuss something. You read a good book, you might find a book club that discusses that, and that's great. There's so many online forums as well to discuss books, and just by picking one up, I mean, now with social media, if you've, looked it up on your phone to be like, great mystery book or this famous fiction book, you're going to get that in your algorithm. You're going to get more content about that. That's going to connect you to even more people. However, Michael does state that he's not at all against the fact that you can explore books through social media and like TV and movies are also great for teaching empathy. But there is that level where it can kind of be used to broadcast a certain message and further polarize people. So if you're talking online, you're more likely to disagree more vehemently with somebody. Whereas if you're talking face to face about a book or a show or something, you're more likely to take in that person's body language and how they're feeling, and you're not going to want to attack them because you see them more as a person. Whereas when you're online, it's a lot easier to just state your opinion and not care how that person might receive it. So we talked a lot about that. On the vein of bringing people together, there's a section in the book where Michael talks about Nelson Mandela and other great leaders that are kind of touted as these heroes of compromising and negotiating because of the few things that literature also teaches, which is a willingness to forgive, going into disagreements and discourse, already forgiving or already be willing to forgive the other side for their differing opinion. Nelson Mandela's particular situation, he was getting a lot of pressure after being imprisoned. He was getting a lot of pressure to take revenge and attack those that opposed him now that he had power. And that was a really attractive option. That, I mean, people can be vengeful, but the other side needed him to bring people together and fix a fallen community. And he knew that that wasn't going to help. So just kind of having that ability to come into these discussions amongst two very different groups and want compromise and also be willing to forgive their transgressions, that he understood that it's not all about him. It wasn't about him getting revenge or his group, whatever. So that was a huge component, which he talks about in the sense of we don't value disagreement in that it can teach us things and bring us closer together and get us towards a compromise. That willingness to forgive is another huge takeaway you can have from reading because oftentimes in order to align yourself with the main character or a character you admire in the book, you have to have their same willingness to forgive. The story often doesn't move along unless somebody is willing to engage in conversation. Often it might be like a combat if you're reading like fantasy and things like that. But even then, there's this higher ground, this general moral lesson that is often a takeaway of just you are able to kind of forgive a villain, even though they've done all these things, just because the hero emulates how you can do that. And so that's another huge component from literature that the more you read it, the more you are getting that practice at having disagreements and going through conflict, not with the aim of winning and being the winner of an argument, because nobody's a winner of an argument. There's always a downside. You lose a relationship, you lose a friendship, or you disconnect with a family member. That's never the point. And Michael starts this book off in an incredibly excellent way by bringing in a story by Zadie Smith, who is another incredible fiction writer, and I believe she's written some nonfiction as well, but she has so many stories and Best American Short Stories and all that. But he brings in one of her short stories to explain this, of these women are having an argument and it's escalating and escalating. And only when this park keeper walks by and shares his own perspective on the matter, which is completely different from anything they would have ever thought of because they're not him. They haven't been through the things he's been through. Does their argument kind of fizzle out? And they remember that their relationship to one another and treating each other with kindness is so much more important than anything they're arguing about. And that willingness to forgive and putting the importance of relationships and somebody's emotional safety above winning that argument or trying to change somebody's mind is so much more valuable. And that's a huge takeaway that Michael shares about literature because of how the characters interact and how dialogue is portrayed in literature is so much more accessible than trying to get those conversations started sometimes in your daily life. Because oftentimes you might be talking to somebody that doesn't have those same values of a willingness to forgive and valuing relationships and kindness over winning an argument. But I really felt empowered by that particular, well, not just that particular story in that moment, but also the entirety of what this book discusses. Because, as I said in the start of this video, that if you're a reader, this felt so empowering because I feel like there's this kind of mantra around where if you're not actively doing something or learning about an issue at hand, then you're part of the problem. And I agree with that to some extent, where if you're just being completely passive and not really willing to stand for anything, I get that, but it's overwhelming to feel like you need to be so up to date on every single thing. And especially now, there's so much going on. You cannot keep up without being so weighed down by all the news, all the events, all the different legislation that's coming around. There's so much to be overwhelmed by. But this particular book gave me so much, it put me at ease because there is so much power in simply being a good citizen, somebody who values the safety and well-being of other people. And by reading books and literature and fiction and everything, especially because I'm not one to read nonfiction all that much. I just don't enjoy taking in a bunch of facts all the time. So as somebody who loves fiction, this felt really good because just by doing something that I love, I'm getting that practice at being empathetic and a problem solver and all of the qualities that Michael talks about. And that made me feel really strong that just as being a reader and doing something I love, I am contributing to a problem that I want solved. And so if you're a reader, you're doing something right already without having to add on a new task to become a better person, where you got to drink your water every day and socialize and blah, 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 all that. No, it's just something you already want to do. And if you're not a reader, this book was so easy to digest. That's another reason why when I mean, it wasn't necessarily written to be this short on purpose, but I'm glad it is this short because it is something that the lesson within this that books can help save a democracy is such a great lesson. I asked Michael what his target audience would be, and he said it'd be people like me, like somebody who enjoys literature and wants to do something about the current situation of our political climate. Because I asked Michael if he had already planned on writing this book before everything that's gone down, or if the current political climate kind of inspired him. And he said it was the current situation that inspired him to write this. And I want this in more hands of leaders and educators and any individual, if you're a reader or not. Because if you're not, you're by reading this, you're already contributing to a solution. And I thought that that was so beautiful because how accessible is that? And and it's so condensed. You don't have to read a whole collection of essays or heavy informative dialogues. It's just a short book. There's 3 sections, and that is it. And it didn't feel like there was anything left out, like something wasn't well explained. No. Michael did an excellent job of fully filling out his concepts, and they're also such things that we innately know. But with books, you're so personally immersed in that world that you have so much more value. And you really get to see characters as humans because we see their little day-to-day interactions. Whereas in TV and movies, you have to skip over so much of that because it's a visual media. And that would get boring if we just saw a character doing, you know, a watch on a watchtower for 4 hours. That would be boring. But in a book, you're getting that character's internal thoughts. They might be speaking to somebody, they're taking in the surroundings and telling you about the history of a place or where they're going next or what they're worried about. We don't get that internal dialogue in so much digital media. And that's what makes us really human a lot of the time are those concerns and those worries that we have when we're just sitting there. And everybody has those. So by reading books, you get exposed to the understanding that everybody's worried about the current situation. We all have that in common. And I was really excited about this book. I was worried it was going to be really dense and confusing because I don't really pick up any books usually that are related to politics. I like to keep my reading kind of as an escapism sort of thing. But in another great quality of this book is it left me with a lot of questions. And one of them that I asked Michael was in the beginning of this book, when the women are arguing and talking, escalating this crazy argument, I had the question of how do we remind ourselves to gain perspective and be empathetic in a moment where we are being attacked in a conversation? How do we take a step back, take a deep breath, and remind ourselves of a book character or something we read that we were reminded of empathy? And he made the point that one, that's really difficult to choose to step out of a heated discussion and gain perspective. That's hard. Like the women in the story probably would not have found a new perspective had that park keeper not come by and said something. Their argument probably would have ended very differently. But in our day-to-day conversations, when things get heated, what can we do? And he just made the point of practice makes perfect, essentially. The more you read and the more you surround yourselves with people who hold the values within literature, you will have the ability to gain perspective innately. You will want to know why that person feels the way that they do. What's their backstory? What's their reasoning behind that? It's harder when those relationships are personal, absolutely, because you know why that person thinks what they do. And you have to just remember, like in the story at the beginning of this book, that the relationships and the value you have with the relationship with the person you're talking to should always take precedent over whatever it is you're arguing about. Obviously, our political advocates don't have that same perspective they can fall back on. They don't have like an emotional connection to that person. But there's the ultimate idea of you want to compromise, like you want to have that willingness to forgive. And I think you can fall back on that same thing in a personal relationship where your emotional relationship takes precedent. And ultimately, you should be trying to just get to a place where you're both comfortable with each other's perspectives. You don't have to agree. Michael is very adamant about that, that you should not be leaving your beliefs and your values behind when you enter a discussion. But you do have to have, he quotes like a greater pliancy of thinking. You have to be open, not open by forgetting everything you believe, but open to forgiveness and open to understanding somebody else's opinion and perspective and values. Because though you might disagree, you might also learn something more through that. And you'll probably feel more comfortable accepting their point of view for what it is rather than trying to change it. Because I know from personal experience, a lot of the time I engage with arguments with family or friends, and I know going into it, I cannot change their mind. So then I start to think, well, what's the point? If I can't change their mind, why am I even talking about this? But Michael argues that the point is not, it was never to change somebody's mind. The point is to discuss, to engage as a community, to be connected. Through these discussions, we learn more about ourselves and our values and what we like, what we don't like, our commonalities. because you almost always find common ground if you come into it wanting to find it. So it's all about that perspective. And I love that I thought I had to like learn, I don't know, like take a human communications course to be able to understand how to do that, or like a public speaking course to like get better at convincing people of my opinion. When in reality, I just need to pick up a book and I will be more likely to accept what that person has to say and probably be more able to articulate my values simply by aligning with other characters that I've read. So I found that really motivating, and I liked his response to my question because I felt already more secure in my ability to have these difficult discussions than I did before. And another question that I came up with, because I think this kind of gets at the heart of what he's saying, because his answer was fantastic. But my question was, what book character best represents you, and what would somebody learn about you by reading that character? Like, how would they be better able to interact with you and understand what you value by reading that character? And when I asked Michael this, I already knew he probably wouldn't have one character in mind because he reads so much. And the more you read, it's like trying to pick your favorite song or your favorite movie. There's so many great options that all align to things you like that you can never pick just one. And that was essentially kind of his answer of he couldn't pick just one because he feels that he finds a piece of himself in every character he reads, no matter who they are. And I think that is the best summary of what this book says. That's the takeaway, is that every character you read, there is a part of you in that person. So the more we read, the more we're going to understand every part of the people we discuss with, and that we are all so similar. Because the character they connect to is something that I've connected to. A character they don't like is probably a character I don't like. By reading, we're getting more connected and we're giving ourselves more things to talk about and find in common. And I thought that was a beautiful answer. And I absolutely agree. I think I've read enough that I couldn't pick just one person, but I did want to try and come up with an example. And I'm very curious what other people might think. And one I came up with for myself is I recently finished, or not recently, probably a few years ago. Yeah, I finished the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, which I know, but hey, you know what Michael said? Like, any book is going to teach these lessons, no matter what genre it is. So in this book, in the final book, I think it's A Court of Silver Flames. That's how long ago it's been that I haven't read this. But Nesta is kind of the main character. She's like the oldest sister in the book, and she's going through a very difficult situation. And I found myself really connecting with her. And there were other people who absolutely hate her character and didn't even read the final book because they know it's from her perspective. And I couldn't even fathom that. This is the exact example that Michael was talking about, where I couldn't even imagine why somebody wouldn't want to read this. And I found myself arguing with people being like, no, she's just having a hard time and she's dealing with things maybe not in a healthy way, but in her own way, and I related to her very much through that because she deals a lot with her complicated emotions by training and getting into kind of martial art, physical combat. And I play a lot of contact sports, and that's always been a way for me to process emotion. So I really resonated with that. And her desire to just push herself physically to deal with emotional pain. And I think so many people can connect to that. And there was also, she was getting into kind of these really negative addictive habits. And my family has a huge history with addiction. And so I felt so much empathy for Nesta. And I was talking to one of my friends who hadn't read it, and I was like, "What do you mean you don't like her?" And they're like, "I just think she's so rude. She attacks like her other sisters and is pushing everyone away." And I had so much empathy for that. I think through my family and my own personal experiences, and that led us to this discussion where I, it's just a book, it wasn't that deep. So I was like, okay, I don't really have to like viscerally defend her. And my friendship with this person is so much more important to me, which is a huge theme of the book that of A Court of Silver Flames, is sisterhood and friendship. And so I was thinking on that while I was discussing with her, and we came to the conclusion of like, well, we love those components of the book. We love the sisterhood and the friendship, and that Nesta won't stay this way forever. She's going to have this arc of learning what she's doing isn't healthy and she'll become a better person and you're going to be rooting for her to do that. And we came to this conclusion that, yeah, like my friend should read the book, not because she likes Nesta. She doesn't have to like Nesta, but because she wants her to get better for the other characters. And because there's so many side characters that she wants to see their story end in a happy way. And so it was a great discussion. It made me really happy. And it taught me a lot about what is most powerful value-wise between me and my really good friend. Not that I didn't already know those things were important to her, but it was so nice to be reminded that that's why our relationship has lasted since like fourth grade into college and now through college of we have these values at heart that bring us together. Even if we don't like one person or one of us might like them and one of us might not, it doesn't matter because ultimately our relationship is more important and we can find things to agree on. We had that willingness to forgive and see the other side. And that example really, you know, was the icing on the cake of this book for me. I completely agree with Michael's entire argument, and I think we can all think of a time where we engaged with a book or some form of media where we had differing opinions, but ultimately our desire to explore new media and enjoy a genre and a piece of art brought us together. So Michael's book was excellent, such an easy read. I cannot recommend it enough. I really hope more people pick it up soon and answer my question about what book character best represents you and what would somebody learn from that character. But anyway, that is my review of How Books Can Save Democracy by Michael Fischer, and I hope you enjoyed.